Hey, what's up guys, it's BenBonk and welcome back to the 24th Slimekeep Devlog. In this devlog, I made massive progress on the Slime King boss fight. Also, if you're new here, Slimekeep is a fast-paced roguelike where you must kill and capture slimes to stop the corruption that has infected your land. But without further ado, let's get into it. So, in the last devlog, you may know that I started work on the final boss fight for the game, which is the Slime King boss fight. I just set the scene for this fight, but I didn't actually work on any substance, so I wanted to focus on that. But first, I had a few more touch-ups to add to the boss room. First, I added in these slime guards next to the Slime King, which were based on this concept by Jeff Turtles, so huge shout out to him for letting me use and edit his art. These guys were mostly cosmetic, but I also had plans to use them in one of the Slime King's attacks. Next, I edited the bleachers on the side of the fight to stand out a little more, as previously they just kind of blended in with the floor. And I also made actual tiles for the corners of the room. Moving on, I felt like this room was pretty empty at this point, and it was really just missing some decorations and cosmetics. So I nabbed some of the cosmetics I made in my old game Divided Dungeon, recolored them, and put them in the game, as well as some additional decorations. You'll also notice I added this green floor with some colliders, which I think really helped to enclose the fight. Finally, I added in a health bar for this boss, so the player could actually see what damage they were doing. But with all that said, it was now time to actually get to creating attacks. In the last devlog, I touched up a bunch of ideas for these attacks, but now it's actually time to create these attacks. You also might know that there are 2 attacks per phase of the king, and 5 phases based on different types of slimes in the game. So I wanted to start off with the ranger phase, and the first attack idea I had would be an attack where the king would throw his crown on the ground and the crown would spew out tons of projectiles. So to make this attack, I first created an identical idle animation for the king without the crown attached, as well as an idle and shoot animation for the crown. Then I just implemented this crown throw animation. I used tweening to get the crown flying off the king's head, and I tried my best to make the transition look as clean as possible. Now I need to actually create the projectile attack. I started off by making it so that the crown could spew out projectiles in all directions towards the player. Thankfully, this was pretty easy to implement, because I could use my pre-existing projectile script to do most of the work for me. And that was going to be the whole entire attack, but I kind of realized that this was a little too plain and repetitive just to have projectiles randomly spew out. So I thought it could be neat to have multiple different projectile patterns in this one slime crown attack. So I realized I could use the same pre-existing projectile script to create a bunch of different unique attacks for the projectiles without much additional effort. For example, the projectile attack you just saw has a projectile shootout in a random initial rotation in all 360 degrees and a short wait time in between shooting each projectile. But what happens if I just took away that wait time and spawned all the projectiles at once? We now have this really cool pulse effect with natural gaps for the player to dodge in between. This little change created a whole entire new attack pattern, so just keep these things in mind if you're a game dev. You don't always have to overcomplicate things, and small changes can create whole new interactions and mechanics. But anyways, I just made another attack where the projectiles would follow the player with a little bit of randomness added, and I figured these 3 patterns would be enough for this attack. I then set it up so the crown would choose between each of these 3 different patterns when attacking. Each of these patterns would attack for around 10 seconds or so, and then repeat choosing another random pattern of the 3 for an additional few cycles. And once the cycles were done, the crown would return to the king. And boom, just like that, we have a whole entire 1 attack done out of 10 total attacks. Yeah, this is gonna take a while. But you know it doesn't take a while? Wishlisting Slimekeep on Steam. Seriously, it helps out a ton with the Steam algorithm, so please consider doing that if you enjoyed these devlogs. Link in the description. But moving on, for the next and final ranger attack, I initially had the idea of having slimes pop up with miniguns to shoot towards the player. However, I figured this would be too similar to the crown attack, so I switched it to having little slimes shoot bombs from bomb guns on the side of the king. Back to work I was, and I hopped into Sprite to start making this bomb gun. I just ended up with an idle and shoot animation and got that set up into Unity. Now I needed an actual bomb for the bomb gun, so I made this bomb as well as an explosion animation for the bomb. Next, I got the actual shooting set up, and made it so that the bombs will shoot out of the guns at random intervals and move towards a random position on the floor. And once the bombs reach that position, they will explode, potentially damaging the player. And there you go, that was pretty much the other ranger attack, nothing too complex. But something that did end up being complex was what's to come in the next attack. And for the next attack, it was time to work on the brute phase. For the first attack, I had the idea where the Slime King would jump off his throne and lunge towards a player kind of like the square slime. Starting off, I reused some animations from the intro cutscene to create this jump animation. I then started experimenting with slime lunges. It didn't end up looking the best in my opinion, and there were some weird behaviors because I tried to make the system using tweening. So I headed back to work and proceeded to spend 2 hours trying to figure out an alternative movement system. However, every time the Slime King just wouldn't move at all, which was extremely frustrating. As it turns out, I accidentally had the freeze position checkboxes checked on the Slime King's rigid body. So yeah, pretty much life of game dev right there. But regardless, I eventually found a solution and got the king moving towards the player in 4 directions. I might edit this to be 8 directions in the future, but yeah, I'll see. And I also made these really neat move animations and transitions, as you can see. To wrap things up, I made a flash effect when the king was done with the slide attack because I definitely wasn't lazy and didn't feel like making a system to have the king jump back on the throne. And finally, I just made some screen shake when the king hits the fight at borders, which really added the needed juice to the attack. Now it's time to move on to the next brute class attack, which I wanted to be a sort of ground pound attack. So I got to work and create a sort of basic ground pound animation right off the bat. I thought this looked pretty neat, but there's no movement yet, so I worked on that and I got the king to move to a random position on the floor and smash to the ground. This was a good start, but I still felt like it was just too easy to dodge and lacked something, so I figured I'd add this sort of seismic wave to ramp up the difficulty. This definitely helped a ton, and that was pretty much the attack right there. Just keep in mind, I am aware that this attack probably needs a shadow to display depth and some more polish overall, but I'll try to finish that up in the next devlog. Now, it was time for the passive phase, which basically meant the Slime King would use other things beside himself to attack. Getting into it, for the first attack, I wanted the Slime King to have some kind of spawning attack, where he would simply spawn a bunch of slimes on the floor. I coded this up and basically just looped anywhere from 20 to 29 times, spawning a random enemy from a list of possible enemies each time at a random position. In game, you can see that I pretty much recreated the jam version of Slimekeep, but after adding some more enemies to the list of possible enemies to spawn, things are looking much better. This attack is admittedly very simple, but I also think it's sort of interesting because the player has a decision to make. Do they kill the enemies, decreasing their risk of taking damage, but losing potential damage dealt to the king, or do they focus on shooting at the king, dealing actual damage to the boss, but becoming more susceptible to damage? It'll just be interesting to see how people play this out, but yeah, that was pretty much the attack. For the next passive attack, I wanted to actually utilize the guards because let's be honest, right now they're doing a terrible job at actually guarding the king. So for this attack, I wanted to make it so the slime guards would thrust their spears around the room in 8 different directions. So I started working on this attack, and after a bit, yeah, things weren't going too well. I had the guards moving randomly, so they wouldn't actually know how to stay inside the room bounds. I needed to fix this, but first I got the slime guards to move in sync, which I thought looked really cool. But back to the issue, I was choosing the entire list of directions that the guards would move in at the start of the attack, so there's no way for me to really guarantee that the slime would stay inside the room bounds and be spatially aware using this method. So I ended up changing the move direction to generate after each move, so I can now actually know where the guard was in relation to the environment. I then would be able to check if a randomly generated move direction would keep the guard inside the bounds, and if it did, that's good, but if it didn't, I could just try randomly generating another move direction until it'll leave the guard inside the room bounds. And I actually managed to get this working, so here's what it looked like. The guards would move around as normal, but never leave the fight floor. And this was cool and all, but unfortunately, there was indeed a problem. These guards were absolutely clueless about trying to attack the player and would miss all their attacks and not even move towards the player. It was almost like they were programmed to attack randomly instead of actually moving towards the player in an intelligent way. Whoever programmed this is definitely not going to scrap this whole entire movement system and rework it again and actually have the guards move towards the player. So I spent a bunch of time reworking the guards to actually have them move towards the player. I also added in a trail to the guards, which I think looks pretty neat. I made the mechanic where guards could have a 1 in 4 chance to dash 2 times in rapid succession to add some unpredictableness to the attack. And there we go, that was a slime guard attack for you. Unfortunately, there still are a few bugs with the guards trying to escape their leader, but I'll get to fixing those eventually. For the next phase, we have the assassin phase. For the first attack, I really wanted to make some kind of big scythe sweep attack, so I first created this massive scythe for the king, and honestly, I'm really proud of it. I then set this up in Unity, and as you can see, I planned for the scythe to appear at a set position in the room, and I could simply rotate the scythe to create a neat sweep attack, leaving little room for the player to dodge. Moving on, I just implemented the actual brains of this attack. I had a system set up where I could create a new attack by defining a bunch of variables in a class for each attack. So for example, I could set where the scythe would appear, how much it should rotate, how fast it should rotate, and so on. In game, here's a simple demo. The scythe sweeps around and the player must get to the yellow safe zone. I shared this clip to my Discord server and got some feedback that the safe zone should be inverted and the yellow area should be the damage zone, with the normal floor being the safe zone. So I changed that around, which I think really helped, and I also added in a little flash effect before the attack comes out. Now, all that was left to do was to create more attacks, so I created a bunch more possible attacks for the scythe with unique dodging positions for the player, so they have to fight on their toes. So that was the attack. I'm really happy with it overall, and I especially like how it makes the player really have to utilize their dash in order to survive. For the next assassin attack, I had a simple idea where the Slime King would jump off their throne and lay a bunch of bombs on the ground. Then the king would throw some shurikens that bounce off the edges of the floor. So the player would have to dodge these bouncing shurikens, all while dodging bombs that are exploding on the ground. Into Unity I started working on the shuriken. All I really did was give it some bounciness and a random initial rotation, and that was that. Back to the bombs, I just reused the bombs from the bomb gun attack and made the king place them randomly across the floor. These bombs would then explode one after one during the attack. So here we go. Maybe this attack is a little random and cluttered, but I still think it's a decent attack. Alright, I know this has been a lot of attacks, but it is finally time to work on the final phase, and this would be the specialty phase. For the first attack, Equipped Hats on my Discord server had the idea for a sort of lasers attack, kinda like the lasers from the Sans attack in Undertale. This attack would be similar to the Scythe attack, but more sort of grid-based. So I started off by making this laser portal in which lasers would shoot out of. I know the portal's nothing big and amazing, but I'm still really happy with it. I think my pixel art skills have been improving a lot recently. But anyways, I also made a laser sprite which I could simply scale up and down to get the desired laser effect. So now I just need to set the logic behind these lasers. I started off by just simply getting the laser to be able to scale and using sprite maps to keep the laser where I want it. And sooner than later, I had a basic demo setup where the portals would appear, flash a few times, and then send out their lasers which would retract a few seconds later. However, now I still needed a way to have multiple different laser attack patterns. So I pretty much just made an array of arrays which could hold all the portals for each attack, like this. Then I could just tell those individual portals to attack. So with this sort of system in place, I now wanted to make some more portal sizes for more variety in the attack. Into Sprite I was, and this was just a pretty simple but tedious process to create all these different portals. But I got it done and set up everything in Unity. I also used the system for portal attacks to set up this attack with these new portals in place. This was a good start, but there's still a lot to be done. First, I created these attack indicators so the player could actually see where the lasers were going to hit. I then just wrapped up the attack by making a bunch more attack patterns, and I also made some small edits to make the lasers retract faster and retract opposite of the portal instead of into the portal, for example. So there we go. I'm pretty happy with how this attack turned out, but we still had one more main attack to get through. So for this last attack, I thought up of the idea where the king could pull out a magical book and shoot up projectiles in a sort of shotgun formation from this book. This was the specialty phase, which partially deals with magical things and that sort. So I got to creating the art for this book, which just took a few hours. I also made some page flip animations, which I think looked pretty neat. I then put this book into Unity and created these clean little intro and idle animations. Next, I made a bunch of projectiles based on stars and moons for magical effect, and made this neat shotgun sort of effect, where the projectiles start off slow and close together, but eventually quickly spread out. The page would also flip in the direction of the player, which is a neat little touch. And that right there was pretty much the attack. So now all the core attacks were done, there's still one last thing I wanted to work on. I wanted the king to have a last stand phase when they get very low on health as a sort of last attempt to kill the player. I asked my Discord for some ideas for this attack, and Falcon Strike on my Discord server came up with the idea of having the king's fists slam into the ground as well as some kind of damage force field so the player can just cheese this phase and it would be more difficult. I really like this idea, so first I implemented this transform animation that had been included in That Worm's original animation that I modified for the king. I also made an idle animation in this creepy transform state, and I think it looked really cool, but admittedly a little terrifying. Now for the fists. I made this sprite and I made a pair of these fists appear when the king transforms. I then set up the actual attack and made the fist just move around the room and slam down towards the player. Moving on, I now wanted to make a shield or wall for the king in this phase. The plan was this wall would appear while the king was slamming his fists. Then after around 15 fist slams or so, the king would rest for 5 seconds, the wall would disappear, and the player could now damage the king. So I set up this mechanic in game, and now this phase was pretty much done. All it really needed was a little more polish, so I added in this neat little slam effect and a little bit of screen shake, which really helped. Finally, I wanted to set up a death state for the king, so I made a little death explode animation and set it up in game with a neat little flash effect. I'm not sure what's going to happen after the flash animation, but I'll figure it out eventually. So there's the Slime King boss fight for you. It's obviously not finished, and I still have some more mechanics I want to introduce, as well as many more elements of polish to the fight, so stay tuned for that in the next devlog. But that's all to say for now. Thanks so much for watching, and please let me know what you think of the boss fight in the comments down below. Also, please don't forget to wish the Slimekeep, it really helps. Anyways, I'll see you in the next video, bye.